Hello everyone and welcome to today's webinar, Getting Started with Extjs, hosted by Sencha. My name is Raj Piyuro. I'm a marketing manager at Sencha and I'll be moderating today's webinar. I am pleased to introduce today's presenter, Mark Pismano, Senior Sales Engineer. Before I hand over the mic to Mark to kick off the webinar, I would like to take a moment to remind you that this webinar is being recorded and will be available to view on demand on YouTube platform. Additionally, we will host a Q&A session at the end of the presentation. If at any time during a webinar you have a question, please submit it via questions panel. Mark, you now have the floor.
All right, thank you, Raj, and welcome everyone. I'm excited to present getting started with Ext This is going to be kind of where you begin. What things do you do to get the trial? What do you expect in the product? We're going to do a lot of demos, and hopefully at the end, if you have questions, you'll go ahead and submit them, and we can get them answered. So let's go ahead and get started. First off, just to level set the presentation, we're talking about Sencha's flagship product, Extjs. I think some of the cool kids call it Extjs. I kind of go back and forth. But Extjs is our flagship JavaScript framework. Sometimes we call it a JavaScript SDK. It allows you to build data-centric web applications that run in a browser. And among other things, it includes 140 and probably more than 140 fully supported, consistent components. There are a few that are used a lot more than others, in particular things like the grid, we have a charting package, etc. We'll go through some of those things, but we really feel it's everything you need to build robust, data-centric web applications for your business. So Sencha has been around for a while, and a lot of Sencha's customers are building big data-centric applications. A lot of people building web applications that handle transactional data, and a lot of customers in the financial services industry. So we're proud of the fact that we have a big customer base, a lot of big customers, Fortune 100 customers. There have been a lot of developers that have joined the Sencha community over time, over more than a decade. We've had a lot of product downloads, so we're really positioned for you to take advantage of a stable, buildable SDK. We started out as a startup way back in the day on the West Coast of the United States. We are now a part of the Idera suite of brands. We're part of the developer tools. So if you're interested in what other sibling products we have, please feel free to visit the Idera webpage. And as I mentioned, Extjs is the flagship product. There are a suite of tools that support Extjs. We'll talk about some of those. There are other products like GXT, which are cousins to Extjs. It's really Extjs for Java developers as opposed to JavaScript developers, but we're going to focus on Extjs. One of the things that makes us unique is that our product is totally and fully supported by us, as opposed maybe to an open source tool that is either community supported or just available for you to download. But we, as you buy a license to our product, are committed to supporting you. We have a support portal. We have the ability to have tickets. I'm going to showcase some of that, but that really gives you the ability to be assured that if you have an issue, have a problem, there's some place you can go. So the first thing that someone experiences when they want to get started with Extjs is our trial. And I figured I would walk through just what that process is. It's pretty straightforward. If we start out here at the Sencha homepage, which is sencha.com, and you click on the download Extjs button, you are presented with a form. You fill out the form and click download now. Once you download, you will get a zip file of our Sencha command product. And the description of what you do with that product is here in our quick start guide. So this is part of our Ext.js documentation. As I said, you'll get a zip file, you'll unzip the file, and the Sencha command tool, which you'll see in a bit, I'm going to run it, is an installable tool. We have a little installer here, whether you're on Mac or on Windows. You would go through, click on the installation wizard, essentially clicking next on every page. And when you click finish, you will have Sencha command installed appropriately in your path. And you'll know that it was a successful install if you go to a command line and you just type the word Sencha. It will essentially show you the options and categories of things you can run with Sencha command. It will tell you what version of Sencha command you have. I have the latest version running in my environment, which is version 7.6. And at this point, you'd be ready to take advantage of building an initial application. So that's where most people get started. There are also other avenues to getting started. You'll notice this getting started says getting started with zip. There's another getting started that's getting started with NPM. So a few years ago, we built a suite of tools that we call open tools that allow you to use NPM or the Node Package Manager to build your Sencha application. So we'll look at that in a little bit, but let's continue to focus on the first step, getting started, where you are building using the Sencha command environment. So once you've brought down and created your application, you're going to want to create a folder where you're going to want to create your application. And I'm going to go ahead and use this folder called Getting Started. And the first thing that probably makes sense to do is to generate an application. And you'll notice here that I'm going to use Sencha command. So Sencha, generate app. The --ext says download the Ext SDK from the server, name the application my app, and put it in the my app folder. So let's go ahead and do that. Let's run that. I'll paste that into my command line here. And you'll notice that as this starts to run, it will indeed download and extract 7.6 from the server if it doesn't already exist locally. It will create a template application. It will write out all of the needed files to the folder that you specified. And once it's done, it will allow you to go into that folder to start using that application. So now the Sencha app generate is done. If I take a look at what was created, we have a folder called My App. So I'm going to go ahead and change my directory to My App. And I'm going to go ahead and open up the project or the files that were created in the editor that I use quite a bit, Visual Studio Code, which is an open source editor for mostly JavaScript environments, but it has a lot of capabilities for building extensions. We, as a company, are building extensions for the Visual Studio environment. So I'll go ahead and open it up. The way you do that against the current folder is just simply type code, which is the name of the executable, and a dot. So code dot says open up Visual Studio Code in the folder that I'm currently sitting in. And you'll notice here that I have a folder structure. I have an app folder, build folder, classic, etc., etc. I also have a few other files that help Sencha command run. And in particular, I have files that are the code that I will want to write. So this is Extjs code, and it's written in JavaScript, and this particular environment generated a starter application. So what do I do once I have that? We've CD'd into the application. The next thing I would do is run another Sencha command called Sencha app watch. And what I like about Visual Studio Code is I can bring up a command window at this folder by dragging from the bottom of the screen here. So now what I have is the source code. I have my folder, I have a terminal window, and again, Extjs app watch is the command I want. Extjs app watch. So what this is going to do is it's going to build the application for development. You'll notice here, development environment. It will put all the files where they need to be, and then it's going to create a virtual server at port 1841 by default. So as soon as it says waiting, so it's waiting for changes here. If I come to my browser and I type localhost port 1841, which I should have done recently, should be there. So we'll go ahead and run that. Here is the application that was generated. It's just a template application. It's got a menu on the left-hand side here. As I click through the menus, I get a different main window. And that menu is constructed from one of the components that's in Extjs. And then this window is a window that has a very simple version of the Extjs grid. So you'll notice it's got a personnel header and 3 columns. So the next step, let me kind of make this so you can see a little bit here. The next step is I may want to start doing some editing of this application. So I'm going to leave Extjs command running. And the reason it's waiting is it's waiting for me to edit a file. If I edit a file, it's going to rebuild and then allow me to look at the changes in my browser. So let's go to the page that actually is generating the, we'll do the one that generates the menu. Now we'll do the one for this particular list here. So the list is the personnel list. You'll notice it's got a title, personnel. Let's go ahead and just change that title. It's a very simple, we call this a config. So it's a name value pair. As soon as I change this title, I have autosave set up in my environment. So it'll save the file automatically. You'll notice that the Extjs app watch will detect the change and it'll refresh. So we'll just call this mark page. Okay, autosave. It goes and rebuilds. Now, if I come over here and I refresh the page, you'll notice now that the page reflects the editing change that I've made to that particular page. So that's a real high-level view of one way you can get started with Extjs. Go up to the website, download Extjs command, install Extjs command, and then use it to essentially create your application and aid you in the development process. So I'm going to go ahead and stop this and let's go back over and look at some other ways to get started with Extjs. Extjs command, as I mentioned, was the zip way of getting started. The other way is by using NPM. NPM stands for Node Package Manager. And the Node Package Manager is a very popular tool to be able to build and acquire other JavaScript packages that aid you in your development. Node or NPM is a website, and what we've done is we've installed a tool that we built called Extgen in NPM. So if you look at Extjs Ext Gen, Extgen is the tool that we have that allows you to build applications. This is very similar to what I just showed you with Extjs command. As a matter of fact, Extgen uses Extjs command under the covers, but it adds that extra level of NPM capabilities. So you can see here I can install, and the way you install in the NPM environment is a very simple NPM install command. So you'll see here that's the first thing that we're suggesting here. The trial version of Extgen is on the public NPM site. Our commercial version is on our own NPM site. So if you have the commercial version or you want the commercial version, you're going to be logging on first. But in general, what you're going to do is install Extgen. The -G is globally. So I've already done that. If I come back to my command line and I type Extgen, you'll notice that it says that that tool exists, that I have the ability to get started. And as a matter of fact, it gives me a couple of examples of how I could generate an application with Extgen. So very similar to what I did with Sencha app generate, I could do the same thing by, for example, taking this line and running that on the command line. So that's going to generate, and before I do that, let me come out of the My App folder. So I generated at the same level. So let me come down to here. Now let's generate the application. And again, Extgen under the covers using Sencha command. You don't have to install Sencha command first. It will install it automatically. It just simplifies the process. You literally just need to go install Extgen globally and generate the application. So this is the command that we're running right now. When this is all done, very similar to what I did with the Sencha command generated application, I'm going to go ahead and bring up the application and start. But in the NPM world, you use an NPM start command. So we're all done here. It generated a folder called Modern App. There it is. So I'm going to CD into Modern App. And just like I did before, I'm going to go into the code window. This code window has a similarly organized file. The biggest difference you'll see in an NPM application is this node modules folder. Node modules is where NPM stores any modules that you might want to be using. And you'll notice there's a node module folder for Sencha. And within that, Sencha command is already installed. I also get some packages for the Extjs SDK. In this particular case, I chose to build using the modern toolkit as opposed to the classic toolkit. Those are two different toolkit environments available. And it will run the NPM process. I'm going to go ahead and delete Sencha command here, only because I have an access issue that I haven't figured out on my machine yet. But if Sencha command isn't here, it will run the version of Sencha command that's installed on your machine. And as you all know, I have a version installed because I just used it. So we're going to go down here, just like we did before. And in this particular case, the way NPM works is you have a package.json file and a set of scripts. Notice one of the scripts is start. So if I type npm start, where it's going to go and run npm, it's going to run Webpack, which is a module bundling system in the NPM world. Underneath the covers, it's running Sencha command. You don't really need to know that or worry about it. Once it's ready, it'll give us that same ready command. And in this particular case, we get a little bit of that extra support. You'll notice I didn't have to go and open a browser and type in the path to the virtual server. It did it for me automatically. Let's do one last thing. Let's go ahead and make a change just like we did in the other application. So under the app folder, we're going to go into, this time I'll go into the view folder. I'll go into the main and go into the main view. So the main view is something that is created from the application. And you'll notice something interesting that just happened. I didn't bring up the source code. I brought up a visual designer for Extjs as I clicked on main view. Why is that? Well, that's a little sneak peek to the third way you can build Extjs applications and our newest product. It's a product called Rapid Extjs. Rapid Extjs allows you to build and integrate into Visual Studio Code the creation of an application. You'll notice down here there's a little button that says New Extjs app. We're going to look at that a little more in a bit here, but I'm going to go ahead and swap to Code View just for a moment here. All right. So Code View lets me see things the way I would traditionally see things in Visual Studio environment. So in the Visual Studio Code environment, I should say. And I think what I'm going to do instead of this is actually the file that creates the structure of the application. So I'm going to go ahead and bring up this. Well, let's bring up the same file we did before, the personnel file. So I'm going to go back up here, go up to personnel, and click on personnel view. If I go into Code View and do the same thing I did, essentially, I'm going to go find the name of the, well, we'll do something a little bit different. We're going to take the name column and change the text of it just to Mark. So I want you to watch closely what happens here. Because we're running under an NPM environment, there's some additional tooling we bring to bear. So as I type the change, remember I have autosave on my editor. I'm going to go ahead and type this. I do an autosave, Sencha command reloads. The browser is also automatically updated for me. So kind of a nice additional set of capabilities here. I can do my editing, debugging, viewing in the browser, all in a very integrated fashion. Now, it would be very difficult to do my editing if I had a screen this small, but I want to make sure that I have a big enough resolution so you see everything. But what a wonderful experience this is when I have several screens. On one screen, I have the browser window, the other screen, I have the editor, and this process is extremely fluid. I make a change, I save, I see the results of the change. So that's the approach that uses the NPM-based tool called Extjs. As you saw, there's a third way that is fastly approaching, which is our newest tool called Rapid Extjs. Rapid Extjs is currently in beta, and I want to show you that the beta page. So let me come back here. And oh, sorry about that. There we go. So here's the beta page, the starter page for Rapid Extjs. So the beta just recently opened, and you are certainly welcome to participate. The beta is a download of a Visual Studio Code extension file, a VSIX file. And that VSIX file is installed into the Visual Studio Code environment in a very simple way. So if I come over here to Visual Studio Code and I open up the extensions that are currently installed on my machine, you'll notice that if I scroll down here, that Rapid Extjs is one of those extensions. So I've already installed the Rapid Extjs product. For the beta, what we're going to have you do, and there are instructions to do it, you essentially just install from a downloaded VSIX file. So this .vsix file right here is the beta version of Rapid Extjs. I've already installed it, so I'm not going to do it again. It's running, and you'll know it's running if this new Extj app menu button shows up. So this is going to be the third way I'm going to show you how to quickly get started for Extjs. So let me close all of these things. Kind of put a clean slate here. As a matter of fact, let me start from a brand new environment, so it's a little bit more understandable. So I'm just going to bring up a new, clean Visual Studio Code window. So there's no project open in it at all. And you'll notice new Extjs application is available. And if I click on it, I get a dialog to allow me to enter essentially the same information I just entered to generate an Extjs application. So we'll call this the Mark application. By default, it'll store it in the Extjs apps folder, but you can change that. I'm going to use the latest version. I'm going to use the classic toolkit, and I'm going to use the material theme. There is several templates out there. I'm going to use the classic desktop. So by hitting create here, I'm doing what Extjs app generate did. I'm doing what the Extgen tool did. It is generating an application, but within the Visual Studio Code environment. And as you just saw with me editing the views, we now have visual editing available within Visual Studio Code, visual editing of the views that you're building for your Ext.js application. So we're very excited about RapidXJS. As I said, the beta was just released. If you're interested in more information, let me bring up the details of that. Again, this page here has a lot of interesting information about RapidXJS. There is a video you can watch to see what sort of capabilities there are. We are highlighting some of the abilities for the product. And to try the beta version is, again, a very simple download, and then just acquiring that download from our private NPM site. The last thing I'll show you with RapidXJS is just some of the documentation, just so you know where to go. So this beta documentation is available, and we get a little bit of the introduction. It will go through the steps that I verbally talked about with you, the ability to link to the download page. Once you have the file, this is a set of steps within Visual Studio Code to install the VSIX. This is just the approach to install it for the beta. It'll be a much more formal process once the product is generally available. But as you can see, I just install from a VSIX file. I get my new Ext.js application. I generate the application just like I showed you, etc. So I'd encourage you to get out there and take a look at it. If you're interested in what specific features we have in the beta, we have a page that outlines those specific features. And we're certainly looking for feedback on what to add, how to make it better, and looking forward to an eventual release of the product. So those are the ways to generate and get started with Ext.js. A lot of questions I get from customers once they've gotten started is, all right, what do I do then? What is the next step for the product itself? That's where we have a lot of documentation, we have a lot of examples, we have a lot of self-study materials, and I want to just highlight a few of those things so you know what you would do next. First thing I'm going to do is I'm going to go over to our documentation. So docs.extjs.com. And you can see here that Ext.js is its own documentation. I'll point out a few other things here. Extjs command, or CMD, has its own documentation. Some of the tooling that comes with Ext.js. We have a theming tool called Extjs Themer. We have a visual designer tool called Extjs Architect. We have a tool for inspecting code called Extjs Inspector. They all have their own documentation, but we're going to go ahead and look at the Ext.js documentation. And we were just here. This is also what we got to when we installed from the trial. And you'll notice underneath the installation steps, we give you a couple of next steps. Ext.js is all about the components it provides. So we link you to a document to talk about what components are, which components are interesting, just to make sure you understand what we mean when we say components. We also have a link to a document that describes that entire structure that you saw within Visual Studio Code. How is an ExtJS application structured, and why is it structured that way? And how can you use it to build your own applications? And then we have pointers to the 3 things that I think are most important when you're getting started. Our examples page, which I'll come to in a minute. Our resources page, which is a laundry list of self-starter videos, self-study videos, white papers, webinars like this webinar. We always record these webinars and they're available. Any data sheets, any blogs that we've been doing, and also a link to our formal training. So this is a great place to go to learn specifically about Extjs. And these tutorials, these video tutorials are great to get you started. And the last thing is, again, the documentation. So those are probably the 3 big things that I point customers to all the time to really start understanding the product. Going back to the examples are, let me just, a lot of windows up here. The examples are easily accessible. Just type examples.sencha.com and you'll go right to the examples. You'll notice that Extjs is at the top of the list of products, and I always go over here to view examples. So we have a lot of different examples. We have examples that, you know, show portals and calendars and tickets, and they're all great examples. The example that I think is the most valuable to start with is the kitchen sink. And again, we have 2 kitchen sinks because we have 2 toolkits. We have a classic toolkit and a modern toolkit. A little bit of background on that. The classic toolkit is the toolkit that dates back 10+ years to when Extjs started. The modern toolkit used to be a product called Sencha Touch, which was a mobile phone toolkit. We merged the 2 products together several years ago, hence classic toolkit and modern toolkit. So I'm going to go into the classic toolkit kitchen sink. This is intended to be a demonstration and developer tool. So as you can see here, we have many examples in categories on the left-hand side here. These are the categories of the components that Extjs has. So for example, if I'm interested in a grid, some of its core features, I can click on this menu and I can see some of those core features. By the way, the kitchen sink itself is written in Extjs. So if you like some of the styling, if you like how this menu works, you can borrow the capabilities by looking at the source code for the kitchen sink in the SDK. But the way this works is you'll bring up a particular example, let's say the basic grid. And by default, when the application first starts, it starts with this panel on the right-hand side minimized. So if I'm looking at one of these examples, I can see it running. So this one just has basic data, a little bit of styling of some of the cells, a couple images here. This one does grouping. So we've got a lot of different categories of examples. But the really nice thing about this from a learning and ability to use approach is that this details panel gives you the code that you could easily copy and paste into your own application in a best practices Extjs approach. What I mean by that is Extjs follows the patterns of development called MVC or MVVM. You'll notice here that we've got a model view controller. That's MVC. The view is just the UI. The controller is all of the code responding to events of the user interface. And then the model is closely attached to the store, which is the retrieval of the data. So you're going to build a very nicely organized application if you follow those patterns. All 3 of the tools that I use to generate an application follows that pattern. If I go back now with a little bit of knowledge of that organization and I look at one of the folders where there is a view, let's say this customer view, notice I have a model, a view, and a view controller, so MVC. And each one of these has their job. This one's to show the view UI. The view controller is to have any code responding to any events, and the view model would have to deal with data. Now, this customer example is not very robust because it's not doing anything, but the personnel example, if you remember that one, that had the grid. Well, that one has a little bit more interest. It has a store which retrieves data. In this case, it's just a memory store, but in a real application, that would be a proxy to a server, and it would retrieve Ajax data. So the store and model exist in this example, and the controller has a couple of events. If I click on an item, looks like a little ext confirmation box pops up. So this on item selected is actually an event handler for one of the items in the view. So if I bring up the view in code view, here's how you tell Extjs, hey, I'm listening for the select event, or someone clicks on a row, and when that happens, run this code on item selected. And that code is not supposed to be in the view. Separation of concerns is the big topic in an MVC application. So I separate the code from the view, and that code is in the view controller. So that's this function right here. So even within about 30 or 40 minutes, hopefully you're getting a decent sense of what Extjs is, how it's structured, how you would use some of the initial tooling to get yourself started, where I would go for further information, further documentation, and there's nothing wrong with just bringing down the trial and doing exactly what I just did. You're not, all you're doing when you're creating these applications is you're creating a folder. And when you're done with that, you just delete that folder, and you won't have any trace of anything else. Everything that happens in the one folder that you create for the application. So that's a nice, clean way to approach looking at the product. All right, so I've talked about a good number of things related to Extjs. I've really talked about the fact that components, especially the grid, are the workhorse of the product. It's great to have a framework to allow you to build Ext, or to allow you to build web applications, but if you don't have a grid, if you don't have tree views, if you don't have charts, your application is not going to be very exciting. In other environments, in open source environments, you have to go look for those things. You have to mix and match and cobble together your environment. With Extjs, it's all there for you. It's all consistent. It all works together. It's all been tested together. So that's really nice. But as I said, there are probably more significant components than others, the grid being one. There's a few others that I'd like to point out. So if I go back over to the examples and go back to the kitchen sink, we have a collection of premium components. So a lot of these components are in the base product and in the enterprise product. But there are a few that are just in the enterprise product. Those several being pivot grids, D3 visualizations, and we also have calendars and charts, but those are part of the base product. So let me just give you a little bit of an idea of what some of these components are. I've already looked at grids. For charts, you get a full, complete charting package. So any sort of line charts or pie charts or stack charts you might want to build into your application, no need to go out and find those. Those are in the product. You have a full-featured calendaring application environment. So if you want to build calendaring into your application, just like a Gmail calendar, showing full view, month view, weekly view, you have components to build this right into your Extjs application. If you're doing a lot of analytics and your users want to take and aggregate data and see aggregated results, very much like pivot tables in Excel, then the pivot grid is something you want to look at. And it does all that aggregation work for you. And you can build either static aggregations, or you can give your users the ability to configure the aggregations that they want. So we have a little configuration UI that allows them to change the axis upon which they're doing aggregations. And if it's still not enough, we give you an export capability to export out to Excel in full fidelity of a pivot table. And then finally, a premium component called D3 is our integration with the open source D3 visualization environment, which is taking charting to the next level, any sort of visualization. For example, this happens to be a bubble chart of data. You might have a packed circle list of data. Maybe you have a tree map of data. So D3 is a very, very interesting open source JavaScript library to allow you to build all sorts of visualizations. We've brought that library into Ext.js and made it very simple to integrate great data visualizations right into your application. So there's a lot here in terms of the components. As you can see, if I were to expand all this, you could see the more than 140 components that exist. I'd encourage you to take a look at this. As I said, if you find an example and you like it and you want to try it, pull out the details, find it here, copy and paste it into your own application. Along with a robust set of components and a development environment, there are tools available with Extjs to help you in design. We have a set of what we call stencils, which are available to designing tools like Balsamiq or Adobe Illustrator to be able to design really, really nice user interfaces. We also have our own editor environment called Sencha Architect, which allows you to edit and visually design, along with plugins, not only for Visual Studio Code, but for Visual Studio, for Eclipse, for IntelliJ. And then finally, we're working, as you saw, on the latest in our tooling for visual development called Rapid Ext JS. So quite a bit of tooling to support you in the design and implementation effort. And then to go full circle, we also have products, in particular a product called Sencha Test, to help you build unit and functional tests that can be used to integrate with your continuous integration environment and build quality into the build process. And Sencha Test really understands how to build tests for Extjs components. So that's something you should really want to consider. Extjs also has modern capabilities to do things like responsive design. So as a browser gets smaller or bigger, the user interface can change. We've taken that a step further with something we call adaptive design. So one of the things I like to showcase that is on Sencha.com. If you scroll down on the Sencha.com page about to the middle, and you see what's possible with Extjs, this is a sample website we've built that you can use as a template that shows you what I mean by adaptive design. So we're looking at a good example of a robust web application. You can see it, our grid is at use here. It's very, very rich, a lot of data. In Chrome, which is what I'm in right now, if I hit F12, I can emulate a phone by clicking on this little button right here. This, I hope you would agree, is a terrible design for the phone. It's very hard to understand a robust grid on a small form factor device like a phone. But if I refresh this page, you'll notice what I get is an appropriate interface for the device. I get a scrollable list with an ability to scroll left and right with my thumb. This is a different component than the component used in the desktop. But what's nice about this environment, which we call building a universal application, is that I'm using the same project, I'm using the same backend data access and data source, and the only thing that's different in the application is that I've used a list for the mobile device and a grid for the desktop, but we built them in similar fashion. So there's very little different code to allow you to adapt to many, many devices. That's why we call this the adaptive interface. So that's something else to keep in mind. And accessibility is something that if you need it, you really need it. Accessibility is the ability to do interfaces with screen readers or people that have vision difficulties. We've built that into the product. So that's not an afterthought, that's built in. So if you need that, very important and built in. And then I kept alluding to the fact that the front-end web application accesses data. So our data package is very robust, very performant, and gives you everything that you need to build those data-centric web application environments that you need. So that's our high-level look at Ext.js. Hopefully that gets some of you that are new to the product a good starting point. As I said, it's pretty easy to download the trial. So I'd encourage you to do that first. Refer to the documentation for how to install the trial and how to get started building an application. I've shown you the kitchen sink to give you an ability to take examples of the components in action and bring them into your environment. I didn't mention Fiddle, but Fiddle is like having Ext.js in the cloud, fiddle.sencha.com. You basically can build an Ext.js application without even having to install Sencha command. So that's something you might want to take advantage of and take a look at as well. And then, of course, if I haven't answered your questions or you need more information or you are ready to take that next step, please contact us. I'd be happy to spend some time with you to answer any particular questions. But I hope this has given you a good feeling for the product and gotten you excited about getting in and learning more. So with that, I will defer back and see if there are any questions that any of you have that we can answer and discuss.
Wonderful. Thank you for the presentation, Mark. I think it looks like we have a few questions that have been submitted.
All right,
If
great.
you are still with us and have a question, please submit it via our questions panel. Right. Maybe I can start with the first question. How do I buy a product? So the customer, one of the user asking like, how do I buy a product? So is there any options you could help us, guide us?
Yeah, if you're ready to buy, I mean, I showed you the trial, but certainly if you want to talk to one of our sales folks, please do. But on the Sencha.com site, we have this nice blue buy button, and you can buy right from the web if you want. You know, we've got a buy now and a shopping basket. As you can tell, I didn't really mention any of this, but you have a decision to make which version you want to buy. I alluded to it very quickly, so let me just talk about that. There's a community edition that has certain restrictions, but if you just need community support, it's there. There's a pro version and there's an enterprise version. Basically, the difference between the two is those components that I showed you that were our advanced components, the D3 adapter, the pivot grid, the advanced exporting capabilities, and a license per developer to Sencha test. So most enterprises go for the enterprise version, although we do have a pro version as well. So one way to buy is just head on down here, make your decision, and click buy now. Another way is just get a hold of us, and customer support and customer sales rep will be happy to help.
Wonderful. Thank you, Mark. The next question we have here, does Rapid Extjs replace Sencha Architect?
That's a great question. So the question was, does Rapid Extjs replace Sencha Architect? It certainly has the underpinnings and it would be headed in that direction. It is very early in the development process. As I said, we're in beta right now. So over time, more and more of the functionality that you would expect to find in Sencha Architect will be coming into Rapid Extjs. That's not going to happen overnight. So for the foreseeable future, Sencha Architect is not going anywhere. It will still be maintained, updated, and enhanced. But yeah, at some point, probably, we'll come to parity and maybe even exceed the functionality of Sencha Architect. One of the things that we're very conscious of is that Sencha Architect works by maintaining a back end of metadata that allows you to, it keeps track of what you do with an extra set of data, which means that if you step out of Sencha Architect, make some edits, and then step back in, you've ruined your project for Sencha Architect. We are making sure that that is not the way we build Rapid Extjs. So yes, we're heading that direction, but we've got a good way to go.
Thank you, Mark. I think we have one more question. I would like to know if there is a training in Spanish.
If there is what in Spanish? I'm sorry.
If there is any training available in Spanish.
I know my my peer Andres is doing a lot of webinars, and he is from Mexico, so I know he does a lot of things in Spanish. I could probably forward on to him any particulars you have if you're looking for formal training or webinars or whatever from him. So whoever asked that question, if you want to send me an email, I'll be sure to forward that on to Andres, and he can give you more details than I might know.
Wonderful. Thank you, Mark. I think one more last question for the day. What are the
Sure.
different editions of Extjs?
The different versions, yeah, and
different editions, yeah.
Yeah, again, I was just explaining those, but I appreciate the question because I hadn't talked about it during the webinar. They're really the two that you are going to decide between for a licensed version are Enterprise and Pro. The Community Edition, just a little bit of details on that. That's there to kind of take your experience beyond the trial. If you're building something that isn't for profit, or if you're a very small company, there's a couple of rules to whether or not the Community Edition is the right license for you, but that is available. When you do, by the way, when you do get the trial for Ext.js, you get the enterprise trial. So you will be able to see and use all of the capabilities that are in enterprise. When you get the, I think I might have put it in the slides. When you get the email, this is I just went through and requested another copy. When you get the email from downloading the trial, you get this email, and you'll notice that along with the link to the quick start guide, you also get links to trial versions of Sencha Command, Architect, which is, as I mentioned, the visual design tool, Sencha Inspector, Sencha Themer, which is our graphical theming tool, and Sencha Test. So you get the enterprise version of everything in the trial. If you want those from a licensing point of view, that's where you would want to purchase the enterprise edition. And then the Pro Edition is basically all of the things short of the enterprise components and Sencha Test that you can use to develop. So hopefully that answers that.
Thank you, Mark. I think we just got one more question here. How is Extjs handling translations?
Translations? There are, so if you want to do language translations, there are some techniques and examples that are on the examples page that deal with localization. So I would do a look at the examples here. I may see them just by scrolling down here. I'm looking for the localization example. So there is that. If I don't see it, I know it's here somewhere. And then I would do a search on there it is right there, localization. So here's an example of how to do localization or language translations. And I'd also do a search on that same keyword within the Sencha documentation. And we give you some techniques and approaches to do that. So hopefully that'll help.
Thanks, Mark. I think that's all we have today. I think it looks like we have answered all the questions asked this time. Yeah.
Great, great.
I would like.
Well, if anybody else comes up with questions after the fact here, please get a hold of me. I'd be happy to chat further with you. If you are ready to take a deeper look, please go ahead and execute the trial. If you're ready to make a purchase, either give us a call or go to the website, and we are here to support you. We're here to help you make you successful with using our products. So don't hesitate to ask. Again, thank you, everybody, and I look forward to talking to you guys.
Thank you, everyone. We look forward to joining us next time.
Bye-bye.